All right, folks online, I'm just getting us all set up here. Right. Is everyone ready? Okay, let's jump back in. Thanks everyone for coming back to the meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin and let me do this here. Dr. Allison Wilson, who we've got online with us. Thanks, Allison, for taking some time to join us today. Really grateful for your expertise and assistance this afternoon. But I'm going to let Caitlin facilitate this part of the meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, McCall. I was going to say, is there anything you want to summarize from this morning?
Too many things.
Just too many things.
So no,
We're just putting it all out there, and then it'll be messy. We're going to bring it all back together here. All right. So the next couple of hours, we're going to spend some time going through this continuation of the conversation earlier, but specifically around the assessment and screening tools. I'm really excited to introduce you all to Dr. Allison Wilson. Allison's an associate professor and director of the Institute for Early Childhood Education at the University of Montana's College of Education. And we tapped her because she has extensive expertise in this area. And we're really grateful that she can join us today and provide some general guidance around assessments and the component of the bill that we're needing to work through today. So in the next couple of hours, we're going to spend some time doing just some groundwork around what are the needs around recommendations to the Board of Public Education around assessment, and then specifically on the screening component. And then we'll be working to find some common understanding around definitions. I feel like we're already on a really good pathway from where we were this morning, but Allison is going to just help us really kind of put some definitions out there so that we're all on the same page, especially within the context of early childhood settings and this, the early literacy program or preschool or however we're going to define that moving ahead, just making sure that there's common, we're all on the same page when we're talking about that initial screening and then the assessment part. And then you all have the crosswalk. So Allison's going to be going through that, but really the big goal, and I think that we're really excited where the conversation's been going this morning, is because recognizing that this needs to be more about a set of criteria that align with what's in 352. It gives us some guidance, but we recognize that a lot of school districts are doing something. And so what we hope this crosswalk can do is help to compile what are the current tools that are out there, what will align with the criteria that we want to set and make a recommendation to the board about. And then also gives us latitude and areas for expansion if there's additional tools that come up over time that could still align really well with the criteria that we're outlining. So just a quick point of reference before I turn it over to Allison, within the bill, within House Bill 352, I just want to make sure that you all see the highlighted sections that we have in section 2 around eligible child for the program. So specifically meaning a child who's determined through the evaluation methodology selected by the Board of Public Education to be below a trajectory leading to reading proficiency by the end of 3rd grade. And then also evaluation methodology, which is a research-based methodology, instrument, or assessment selected by the Board of Public Education to determine, based on a child's age or grade level, whether the child is above, at, or below a developmental trajectory leading to reading proficiency on completion of 3rd grade. So I know we've already talked about this morning, but just want to make sure that we all have that grounding. And then when it comes to that early literacy targeted intervention, so looking at section 3, just wanting to make sure that as we're on the evaluation piece, that is developmentally appropriate, research-based, cost-effective, and if possible, aligned with formative assessments that inform instruction in the classroom-based program as a Jumpstart program. There are additional definitions within that section 2. I'm sure you guys all have access to that, so I'm not going to read through every single one of them, but just wanting to make sure you have that. And then of course, we touched on this a little bit more this morning too, but around section 4, the targeted intervention. So just knowing what OPI is going to be looking at so that we can set this up for success from the get-go. So with that, are there any questions just in terms of those definitions and where we're going? Okay. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Allison. So we're going to start with definitions, then we'll go into this matrix. And like earlier this morning, we really want this to be open conversation and questions so that we can get this all figured out together. Okay, Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here and just really grateful for all the work and conversation that y'all have already been doing as part of this council, and recognize and appreciate the expertise and experience that's in the room here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and the screen that I'm going to share is, let's see, make sure I have it right. Yep. Some common definitions in the early childhood specific fields around assessment. And I believe that y'all have this as a handout as well too. So one of the reasons why I think it's important to put some of these common definitions out here is as we all represent a variety of fields and content areas and potentially age groups even within the early childhood field, whether it be 0 to 5 or within the K-12 system. We often are talking about the same thing, but we sometimes use slightly different verbiage or language. And so the definitions that I'm offering up here today are those that are taken from the field of early childhood education. So the first two up here pertain to screening tools in general. And so within the context of that umbrella term of a early childhood screener, we have what we would refer to as traditional screening and then universal screening. And our traditional screeners are ones that I'm sure almost everyone in this advisory council is familiar with. They're ones that are really looking to identify children early who might need more intensive diagnosis. So potentially as a first step prior to when they might qualify for early intervention, Part C services, or early childhood special education. In general, it answers this question of, does a child need further evaluation? And so some examples of those traditional screening tools are like the Ages and Stages questionnaire, the Denver 2, the DIAL is a common one that I know many of y'all are familiar with, early screening inventory, et cetera. And so those tools generally have, while they're quick and simple to administer, they are looking at a broad snapshot across a variety of domains of development. Similar in terms of a quick snapshot screening tool, but more focused on a content area would be using that phrase universal screening. And so this is looking at gathering academic or sometimes social emotional behavior data. They're, again, brief and easy to administer, and they're designed to identify a child who might need to receive more intensive intervention or support in a particular area. One thing to note about universal screening is that they often can and do serve a dual purpose based on who and how they were developed as working for program planning and progress monitoring as well too, which I know is something that's of interest, particularly for this advisory council and use around early literacy. So a universal screener answers the question, does this child need additional instruction, or is this child responding to intervention? And so some examples of common tools in the early childhood field are MyIGDs, or individual growth and development indicators, the preschool early learning indicators, which is the PELI. That's the pre-K version of DIBELS, which is now a cadence reading, which I'm sure many of y'all are also familiar with. There's the STAR early learning as well too. And so almost all of those are not only universal screeners, but also used for program planning or progress monitoring as well too. So I offer those definitions out there just as a distinction. I know that in the work that this committee has done already has been gathering a list of potential screening tools and assessment tools that districts are already using. And I've looked over the survey that's gone out both to early learning providers and also districts in Montana. And across that list, just from quickly looking through it, it looks like many of those are captured within a traditional or universal screening model. So these two definitions will be a column on the crosswalk that has been shared with y'all on the Google Doc. And so I guess I just would like to pause and ask as a point for questions or comments or reflection from anyone with regard to those two sort of distinctions within the phrase of screening.
Go ahead, Lance.
Just wondering if we can start to look at these categories and continually identify two different things from my standpoint to get to the finish line, so that, you know, again, I'm not in your realm here, okay, on the expertise here, but I know I need to get to the finish line. And to get to the finish line, I need either a safe harbor, which means which of these will be designated as, if you use this, you're done, okay? Safe harbor. You don't have facts and circumstances. If you've got Dibble, or I just heard one of those things, so I'm saying Dibble. If you got Dibble, you're good. And then the other thing is, what are the characteristics that are in common that we can use as a laundry list of these are the things that must be evident in whatever methodology that you use in order to satisfy the requirements of this rule. And subsection 2, the following specific items, if used, will be considered to be in satisfaction of subsection 1. So characteristics in a subsection 1 and safe harbors in a subsection 2. I'm not saying which of those belong where, but I strongly believe we need to start with that kind of category in order to avoid getting into the minutia and interfering in existing practice and overriding local control.
Yeah, Lance, and I think based on the discussions that we're going to hear in the next couple hours, we're going to put that together and we'll bring something back for you guys next week to really go through and make some come to some consensus on how we want to move forward. And that's going to be, right, it's going to be age 4, K 1, 2, 3. So that's how we're going to have to put it together. And for each of those, there will be criteria and identifiers and accompanying safe harbors, AKA dibbles.
Yeah.
So we're going to come up with something like that based on what we hear from you guys in the next couple hours, and the way in which Allison can kind of help answer some of those questions for us. She's done a ton of work on the age 4 piece, which I know is what we really need to help schools with, because right now they're doing early K. So this conversation is going to be really helpful for that age 4, and then we'll really try to build that out for the other grades as well.
Do we have, I don't mean to ask so quickly, but do we have consensus that that's an appropriate way to go? Characteristics and a safe harbor list? Is that?
Yes, I agree completely. I'm not sure about everybody else, but I think that if we have the characteristics, so if someone doesn't want to use something on the safe harbor, there's still local control. But an easy list of these definitely count. You don't have to do the research. You don't have to worry. I think is very important.
Right. School district would still have to be able to show that it's research-based, because that's what the legislation.
Right. We just got to make sure we don't put anything on the list that's not research-based.
Agreed.
Right.
Or
developmentally
developmentally inappropriate.
Right.
And I guess I should ask, I mean, is that, I had heard you all this morning saying that that might be a good way to move forward. Does anyone have any questions, concerns with us moving in that direction and gathering some kind of, or creating some kind of matrix for you to look at next week based on what we hear from you today?
I think avoiding picking one is
Agreed.
important. And during the legislative session, just so you know, there were people that really wanted to pick one. And it was anecdotal based. It was, hey, my niece's friend's cousin sister is teaching in insert the state, and they love this, and you should do it. We should plug it right into the bill. I said, please don't. Okay, so I think you guys would probably be naturally built to sort of be in line with this sort of let's have a menu so that we can allow educators to educate and determine what's best for the kids that they're serving. But I just wanted to make sure I kind of put that up because that was actually it was under the radar, but it was a very specific time during the session when you could have ended up with this is the assessment. And we didn't. So I hope we don't go there in a rulemaking process. Doesn't sound like we will. So good.
All right.
I
I don't
really-
see any, oh, sorry, Allison. I don't see
No,
anyone
go ahead.
with any concerns or questions. And obviously, like, we will continue to have conversations around these next week. It's not like whatever we write down is what's going to be. We'll have discussion around each of those criteria and identifiers too. So,
Mhm.
okay. Allison, back to you.
Awesome. I really appreciate that comment, Lance.
Sorry,
and
one
also
more-
just
Sorry,
Okay.
one more thing from the
of
room.
course.
Lance.
I was that kid when I was young when you had to say, right, stop that. Slap. Just when you get a chance, you guys, look at 10.5.5.7.2.4 for a model. Okay, it's the evaluation. You have to have an evaluation, periodic written evaluations, opportunity to respond in writing to the completed evaluation, access to the employee's files. Superintendent shall develop and publish a model evaluation that complies with this rule in collaboration with a bunch of groups, including us, which we did. And a school district adopting and using one of the model instruments shall be construed to have complied with this rule. Though use of one of the models shall not be required, provided that the district's evaluation instrument is and process substantially conform to the requirements set forth in this rule. That's your language that you copy and paste and then adapt to this environment, just so that you guys know that. And then I promise I'm going to be quiet. Thank you. Sorry, Allison.
That's okay. You're honestly setting the stage for where we're going next. And I really appreciate it. Just having that point of clarity around what we mean by a screening tool and having a common definition is going to enable us to go down that list of tools that have been curated based on common experiences or because someone's mom, sister's aunt's daughter uses it in her classroom, and we'll be able to identify from that list, ideally, it sounds like a menu of options that could be put forth that are both research-based and developmentally appropriate for this purpose. So I think what makes the most sense is I'm going to stop sharing my screen with this document and switch over to the crosswalk starting draft spreadsheet, which is a Google link that y'all have received. And let me pull that up. Okay. Is that showing on y'all's end?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Just working with my monitor here and making sure that what I'm looking at is what y'all are looking at. Awesome. Okay, so the spreadsheet here has a variety of columns and rows, of course. You'll notice that in column D is where we would indicate the type of tool. And this is where those suggested definitions would help clarify how you would identify a tool as universal screener or traditional screener or progress monitoring, et cetera. And so then I think that's where that point of clarification is, that once we've identified that type, you can begin to say, okay, this could be an appropriate tool, or maybe this is not an appropriate tool and we can remove it from the list. In column A, you'll see a number of different assessments. These assessments are ones that actually, for the most part, I might have missed a couple or two, but they've come from that list that went out on your survey that you created as well. So there's also space to add others if anything's missing. I did also go in and add a couple as well too that I was familiar with around early literacy in the early childhood field. So some of those being like the STAR Early Literacy or my IGDs, the PELI, which is the one that is associated with DIBELS or now a Cadence reading. So that's that first column. The second one gives you that overview and purpose, which is just a place where we can all commonly look at what that tool is. And then I think column C is important, and that's where it talks about that content focus. So some of the tools that are listed on here might specifically have a content focus of literacy, or they might have a broader one, like I said, if it's a more traditional tool of communication, language, fine motor skills, etc., and not specifically looking at a particular area. And then column E gives us a place to identify what age group that this tool was specifically designed for. I think that this will be another column that will offer some clarifying points as to whether or not the tool remains on the list, or maybe it's y'all decide to take it off as an option, because we want to make sure that since this is a classroom base for 4-year-olds, we want to make sure that we are selecting tools that are developmentally appropriate, meaning that the creators of those tools created them with that specific age group in mind. I'll say that I think that there's some slippery slope points of taking a tool that was designed solely for K-12 and applying it to 4-year-olds. And so something to consider as well too. Other columns that are on here that y'all will see are time to administer. Again, y'all know that we're wanting something that's quick and short, and that's typically what a screener is. So something that's certainly less than 15 minutes, but ideally 5 to 10. I know that because this work does not come with any attached funding, it's important that the tool is low cost, and also not just within purchasing the tool if that needs to happen, or potentially utilizing something that already exists if it falls within that criteria, but also thinking about not just accessing the tool itself, but who is there professional development or expertise required to use it. I think I saw somebody raise their hand.
Yep, Marie, go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks.
Thank you. And if now's not the right time, please stop me. But I wanted to make sure
Go
I was
ahead,
clear on understanding the 4-year-old assessment, because I hear that, but in reading the bill, and I want to make sure I'm reading it correctly, it's trajectory leading to proficiency on completion of 3rd grade. So do we need to be looking at a pre-assessment as well as a K1, 2, 3 so that we're following that trajectory, as kids can go in and out of eligibility for that? So I just want to make sure that I saw that 4-year-old developmental, and I totally agree on that, but I want to make sure that we might be looking at 2 different tools.
That's an excellent point, and also information that would be captured in that column E for what age is this age or age range is this tool developed for. So there might be a really amazing tool that you hope that everyone hopes everybody chooses to select, but it is actually only useful for 4-year-olds and kindergarten. And so it would need to either align with or transfer into an older age tool, or maybe perhaps we discover through this process that there is a number 1 recommendation, along with some other ones too, that actually is designed for 4-year-olds and is extended for use up to 3rd grade as well too. Yeah, that's a great question.
Lance.
I just, if we can, without violating the professional expertise at this table, if we can use criteria that are broad enough to recognize that the specifics of the assessment may change from 4-year-old to 5 to 6, 7, or whatever, great. I think that we might find ourselves wrapped around the wheel pretty quickly if we try to have a subsection 1 for 4-year-olds and a new one for 1st grade, 2nd, 3rd. And so I always like to swim it upstream. Okay, so what can we do that is sufficiently broad to identify the characteristics in common of a valid assessment? We already have the statutory minimum, which is research-based. We know that. And you can have your safe harbor list that might actually go right in here and say safe harbor for kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, whatever, however detailed that is or segmented it is. But sticking to the general concept of trying to allow people to fit in what they're doing now, if they believe it to be valid and it complies with that concept of research-based. So
Are you thinking,
Yeah.
are you saying, Lance, criteria that would span from 4-year-olds to grade 3?
yeah, sufficiently
The
broad.
same
to
criteria
encompass.
that you would screen for a 4-year-old, you would screen for a 2nd grader. Is that
Not
what
the
you're
same
thinking?
assessment, but the
Right.
same
Criteria.
criteria. So the criteria is, actually, I really loved one of those things that Allison had up there. You keep asking, does this kid need more instruction? And
Universal
you
screen.
can't, that's one of those universal broad concepts. It doesn't matter how you're going to really get down to the kernel of truth, or which safe harbor you might use, or which methodology of your own you might apply. But what are we looking for in common?
Mhm.
And of course,
Mhm.
at a broad level, I know that we're looking at, does the student still need help?
Mhm.
For the purpose of continuing to lead to a trajectory resulting in success at the end of third grade. And that's going to go like this. It might be a little roller coaster. It might be a linear line for some. It might be
Mhm.
straight up and over. But I just want to make sure as we develop a regulation that we leave all the room necessary for people to say, that's what we do with the 4-year-olds. This is what we do in kindergarten. They're both research-based, but it changes. And the questions we ask when the kid's 7 are different than the questions we ask when they're 3 and about to turn 4 and become first eligible for a program. That we could go in a direction where you would have 5 subsections. Here are the characteristics of a 4-year-old assessment. And I just urge us that I think we'll get constraining on the academic freedom, for lack of a better term, of the teachers that are going to be really figuring this out, because we're going to be looking from afar. You know, the boards are going to be assuring that it's logical and sound and efficient, but we're going to be relying upon expertise of people that we hired because they have it. And I want to make sure that we don't constrain it.
I think that's great. I would just mention that I think that you'll be able to find that within universal screeners, and especially universal early literacy screeners. So while there might be one that was only developed for 4-year-olds, it's likely looking at items related to like phonemes and letter identification, things like that. And those are going to be common elements of something at kindergarten, first grade, potentially as well, but just as it with an increasing developmental trajectory. And there's going to be a menu of items for each of those. So I see what you're saying. And I think that that's something that this council can certainly get to.
Real quick, Allison, Lance, to kind of answer your question, I think this comes back to maybe that, proposal for if there's a science of reading framework, like you're saying, Allison, like all assessments pre-K through third grade and all instruction will address like those components of phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, language. Like we list those out in the column under purpose, and like broadly speaking, district, does your assessment meet these components within these grade levels? And maybe that allows for autonomy, but also addresses the science. I don't know. That's just one thing I keep coming back to in my head, is that framework piece.
I like that.
So in the column L, actually, it has as kind of, and these are sort of color coded as a potential, like if you were just doing a first pass and then you wanted to go into more detail with a smaller list of tools that you've already pre-eliminated, there's that question, what specific components of early literacy are measured? And I feel like that would be a place where you could even just define what that framework is across tools for each grade, such as what was just shared. I do have a column on there. I know that we're primarily talking about early literacy, but I do have a column on there as it pertains to early numeracy. There are some of these, like my IDs and I believe the STAR have some early literacy and or early numeracy components on there. I had to include it just from content and background knowledge that there is a lot of research out there saying that early numeracy skills are just as, and sometimes in some cases more predictive of third grade reading rates. And so it could be an even extra super benefit if it happened to capture that as well too. And then those last,
Sorry, we have another question in the room.
thanks.
Sorry.
Keep
I'm
interrupting me. I can't see the room, so I appreciate it. Just interrupt.
You're good. I'm turning into Florian Lance. So I was just curious, and this would be a really ridiculous question, but it's come up a couple times in conversation with our current 4-year classroom-based program teachers. Is, are we going to be, so I understand it's an early literacy program, but are we going to be able to assess early numeracy and or instruct early numeracy within the program, or is that going to be a hard no?
You could do it completely irrelevant to, but side by side with this, as
Okay.
long as you're demonstrating that you're using the resources that are generated to support your program. And remember, there's also, because this money flows through on an A and B basis, you have all of the accoutrements of local control that attach to A and B generated by any other student. We don't guarantee that we're going to spend $6,600 on each and every elementary student, right? You generate the money on a locally controlled basis. That's sort of a pact that the legislature's agreed not to line item our budgets over the years. And we've agreed to receive a blunt instrument of funding, a proxy amount on a per student basis that can then be spent at a district level to serve all the pupils of the district. Now, if you abscond with all that money from, and you give them a bare bones program, and it looks like your regular program's being bolstered up, you got problems. But proportionality and moderation here, the same levels of, you determine school-based budgeting. There's nothing in the law that defines where schools get a particular sum of money. That's all done at the board table as part of the budgeting process with the administrator and the teachers, of course. So there's lots of flexibility there. But if you were running a straight up, if you had a literacy program and an unfunded numeracy assessment, you're going to find the funds necessary to pay for the numeracy assessment out of all of your funds that are generated in your K-12 base aid payment. That's what I love about this bill, by the way, because all the things that have come before this have always been, here's an ironclad, $1,500 that comes in and must be spent on, and this local control is already baked into this bill by distributing the money through K-12 base aid. The only one that's sort of hinky is the $1,000.
All right, back to you, Allison.
Okay. I'm learning so much from y'all just from your conversations. This is great experience for me as well too. I appreciate that question around early numeracy as well too. And I think that even when you're looking at a framework for what we know is research based around important components of early literacy, you're going to recognize that, especially in those early years, that's taught within meaningful integrated ways as well. And we think about early math, there's vocabulary to that, which is very much in that realm of early literacy as well too. I just want to point y'all to the direction of the remaining columns that are on this slide as well too. Column N is kind of like an icing on the cake sort of scenario. And that might be that there's some type of curriculum that is associated with this assessment. And maybe it's a curriculum a school district is already using. And that's where it would be helpful in guiding the formative use of monitoring progress of with those data. And then the last two columns, again, is this something that's currently being used in Montana? And maybe they might also be being used in other states, and that might be interesting for folks to know as well. So the columns I have color coded, I feel like as a means of or a phasing out of particular tools. So you might not be spending as much time on those, but yeah. I'm curious if there are tools on this list, or excuse me, tools that are not on this list that others, and you have editing access to this, so you can feel free to go ahead and just start typing stuff on here if you'd like. Is there anything missing on here? Is there anything that's not captured that should be a column or point of consideration when reviewing some of these assessments?
Karen?
Well, Allison, one of the things we think about over at Head Start is some of the categorical eligibility, which are highly correlated with difficulty with early literacy.
Yes.
I mean, it's not one of these screeners, but kind of what's your thoughts on things like ESL in foster care, homeless, income-based eligibility? Again, both from the point of view of we're trying to help schools do it and make it as easy as possible to get the kids who need this in without a lot of work on the part of the schools. I'm just wondering kind of where's your perspective on that, and would it be possible to use maybe as an and or with these tools?
I am really grateful for you bringing up that topic, and also as a former Head Start teacher a long time ago myself. I know that from my understanding, the language in the bill is really talking about a specific tool. But I do think that when we think about what are predictive indicators of third grade reading rates, sometimes even the step of a screener might not even be necessary, because we know that based on certain categorical variables like income or being in a foster care system, they're naturally going to be at risk for those, and they are certainly going to show up on a screener as well too. And so that's something I believe often in Head Start why those children immediately qualify rather than putting a family through a round of that. I also think that considering that is, if it's possible, considering that as an option eliminates some barriers to identifying children who might be eligible, because some of those families, given those circumstances, are going to have challenges connecting with the service to be screened in the first place. And yeah, so I think it's a really important conversation. And but I also would maybe defer to the language in the bill, which I am less of an expertise on, and all of y'all in the room are, as far as what is allowable in addition to or as an alternative to a specific tool.
Lori, go ahead.
Yes, I'm just trying to make sure I think I heard what you said correctly. You're saying, is it possible for us to put in our screener language that if a student fits into a certain category or identification, he or she is already eligible without screening? Like such as a student who has been identified for special education or foster care or family in transition. That just seems really broad to me. Now, our district is 95% eligible for free and reduced price meals, and 28% of our students have an IEP. So if someone's going to advocate for easy screening, it's going to be me. However, I find that to be too broad. I worry. I have families in transition who have very bright kids. I have families from foster homes who have very bright kids. I have families with IEP who are speech only and do just fine. And so I just worry about with the intent of the law, and maybe Lance, you can address this a little better than I can, that if we just say because you're X, you automatically don't have the skills to be literate by third grade, seems very categorical and broad for me. So again, just if anyone was going to benefit from that, it would be my district. I'm just concerned.
Yeah.
I would, can I just mention, I would just offer maybe considering the language of not that you don't have the skills, but that you're at risk for reaching for that rate, given a number of reasons.
But I guess there's maybe a legal answer and a political optics answer, and they may be mutually exclusive to some degree. Okay. So from a legal standpoint, the requirement is for an evaluation methodology for early literacy targeted intervention that is research-based. And there is a tremendous amount of documented research out there about the statistical likelihood of a deficit in learning associated with particular factors, notably eligibility for free or reduced lunch. And in Montana, American Indian ethnicity. I mean, just roll it right off your tongue. If you are Caucasian and your parents are ineligible for you to participate in free or reduced lunch, you're graduating at about 93%. The overall average is at about 88, 89. It depends on the year. Kids that are eligible for free or reduced lunch are low to mid 70s. Kids that are American Indian, who also almost all live in concentrated poverty. So you got overlapping factors, are graduating at or low or mid 60s. So that's research. And there is research out there, which is the whole premise of Title I, right? You could make a credible claim as to why you would, under this bill, say one of the methodologies is the sound research on those very factors. From a political optics standpoint, and from the expectation and selling of this bill as being not so rigorous as to require trot them into the executive session of your boardroom, which is the other end of the spectrum, but something that ties in the specificity of that student's participation in an individual assessment performed by someone rather than an assumption of qualification, which might hit on some and miss on others. So in the concept of this whole wave among policymakers, and that the very best intentioned majority party legislators that serve in this legislature are really enthusiastic about personalization. They want to see a commitment from our schools that we're reaching out to develop the full potential of each child as called for in Article 10, Section 1. And so from that standpoint, I'd say it might be tempting to grab it, but you're probably going to get to the same place, because remember, you still have to have permission of the parents. You have to, if you get the kid in there and there's no earthly reason why the student needs assistance, you're going to run into some difficulties there in terms of justifying the continuation of the program.
Lance, in your opinion, would you suggest that that this group maybe stay away from including some of those socioeconomic indicators then?
Yes, even though it's rife through our exceptional circumstances
Totally.
policy, which, I did the first
Yeah,
version. of that
Lance,
many
that's
years
what I was just gonna say. Everything you just said is what our exceptional circumstances is. And so if we allow that, it's going to be template boilerplate to what we're already doing. And then I'm concerned for the program being at risk 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah.
Again, it would be super awesome if that worked, because 95% of my students would automatically qualify. But I'm not sure that's the intent, and I worry about being able to sustain it long-term if that's what we use, because it really just matches special circumstances.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I brought that up, because I do remember during kind of the inception of the bill and the conversations around it, they were very, very clear to say that they did not want to move forward with the exceptional circumstances criteria.
Yeah.
And so I guess as we have these conversations, I don't want to just recreate that wheel, because I think that's going to torpedo it from the beginning. But I also recognize that we don't want to lose a bunch of kids that would have qualified for your programs otherwise. With that said, like Lance just said, I think that we may pick them up anyways. If we write this criteria in a way that makes sense and, can maintain the research-based and validity and all of those things. But that is something that I've been thinking about. And that's why I think we started with the exceptional circumstances conversation. So you guys had a good idea around how kids were eligible for that now. And as we look at creating this new evaluation methodology, how it needs to look different, but also ensuring that we're like including the children that still need to be part of the program.
Yeah, and the allowance for exceptional circumstances, which is the first deliberate acknowledgement from the legislature ever that it was okay, other than the fact that they adopted the law in 78, when I really was still in elementary school. And so, they didn't like it, but they specifically said in here, you can do it. Do it in FY24 and wrap it up. So the safest base here for us is to use all of your expertise that is already here on this page and find the methodology associated with identifying an individual child who is at risk for not meeting that grade level proficiency standard. You're going to pick up all the kids you need. People are going to, I believe, when people actually see an expansion in service for their kids in our public schools, they demonstrate again and again with their feet that they're coming. And so, I think you're going to get there. And I think the one thing that we can do to make sure that all those kids who their parents may not realize, although trust me, they do when they're working 2 jobs and don't have time to spend the time reading to their child each night because they're not there. The kid goes to sleep and they come home at 1 a.m. and they trade off before the husband leaves at 4. And, I know of families like that, and they're even decent jobs for some of those people, but they're still eking along and doing their very best. So they already know it and they're going to come. But our job is to make sure that they know that this is available to them if they want. And there's nothing in the bill that prevents us from marketing that.
I hadn't thought about it until you just said that this actually helps widen the footprint a little bit more. When I think of us specifically in Great Falls right now, because we have to ask that question about income, families can choose Great Falls Public Schools or Head Start. And we can't tell who's who, we can't differentiate between the two because they're meeting similar income thresholds, right? They're all identifying as low income. Our whole intent was to widen that footprint. But it wasn't up until exceptional circumstances that we had to ask families about their financial situation, right? So, but at Head Start, you always have to, as part of this, more of a point system, correct? So you will continue to ask that question. I'm celebrating the fact that we may not have to, but maybe that is where it's going to be helpful in us being able to differentiate. If a family discloses that they are, you know, maybe meeting that income eligibility, then we could make that referral to a Head Start. So that was just an epiphany I just had. You know, we're always wondering about, like, should those kids be in Head Start? Should they be in our seats? Well, the whole goal was to make sure every kid had a seat and not to say, pick this program or that program. But this might allow for that, like us to say, you know, we know more about this child now and we think they'd benefit more from a Head Start setting on income based.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that, Colette. And as you know, Bev and the team in Great Falls think about this. You know, one example in the state is Lockwood, because we've got a class in the same building and they have a 4-year-old class as well. And we actually do a lot of income discussion there, figuring out other family needs too. But because we really have difficulty serving up sort of the top end of Title I, so that 130 to 185, they have the Lockwood takes a lot. We take a lot of the ones that are income eligible for us. So yeah, we'd invite that conversation. One other thing, I totally agree with you, Lance, both the political optics and the research base. But I am wondering with all of you, since you've got experience with intake here, about foster care, homeless, and ESL. There's some marketing we can do, but by definition, they're in circumstances that are either don't have a parent currently, it's going to have to be some other permission, or has a circumstance that's really hard to come in. Is there any carve out for any of those 3 categories that we want to think about?
Okay. Yeah. I think also the reality is, while I disagree with it wholeheartedly, our legislature did not want universal preschool. If they wanted every student to qualify, be eligible, have the service, we would just provide it for everyone. And so we are left with the very difficult challenge of how do we select who gets a benefit everyone needs. I don't think there's any doubt every kid needs it and every kid would benefit from it, but that's not our role. We've been told we have to come up with a screener that identifies only a certain population.
And only with the parents' permission.
And only with the parents'
Request.
permission. And so, again, I disagree with that, but I respect the legislative decision and what we're supposed to do. And I think we've got to keep our mind focused on what can we do to meet that intent and not have the appearance of trying to overreach and just turn it into universal pre-K.
Lots of nodding heads in the room. Allison, take it away. Back to you.
Okay. Honestly, I don't have too much more kind of new stuff as far as what I've already shared with y'all. I mostly just wanted to offer this starting draft document as a place to house existing assessments that are already being used in the school district, and also some ideas for those that might not currently exist but could be potentially beneficial. And then these columns as a way to within that list maybe weed out ones that are not developmentally appropriate or are not collecting the information that's required for the purposes of this work, so that then that list becomes much shorter for y'all to create a menu of more specific recommendations for districts. Yeah.
Thanks, Allison. Since we have you, and as we think about, since we have a bunch of folks in the room who are obviously experts on the K3 and really early K3 part, curious from your perspective, as we look at thinking through that criteria, what are some, and you don't have to like rattle them off. I mean, if you have them, great, but what are some of the like really important criteria that you think that we should consider, remembering that we want to keep it broad enough that it could be inclusive of K3 screeners, in those criteria, but just trying to think through, like, for age 4, specifically, if you can think of some of those important ones or places we need to look for those, that would be helpful. Do you have any thoughts on that, Allison?
Oh, do I? Sorry, I thought you were posing that to the room. I apologize. No, I mean, I think that honestly, if you were to look just within any of the early literacy universal screeners that are on this list, like the STAR or my IGDs, they're going to have comment almost the same things that they're looking at. They're just a different version of a tool. And so they're going to fall into kind of 4 or 5 components of early literacy, which very much inform and align with K and 1 progress monitoring tools. I guess that's my 2 cents on that.
No, that's great. Anyone else want to jump in on that, or maybe share some of the screenings or screeners that they're using and how it might fit into this and those specific criteria?
McCall, can I ask a different question? For example, and for my own edification, like this STAR early literacy assessment, and we automatically assume that assessment is aligned to those Board of Public Ed benchmarks, correct, in reading? Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I think part of the process of putting up some of these tools, filling out the columns and then potentially eliminating some of them would be that you would begin to recognize that the tool itself, given that it is a research-based tool, it is specifically designed with that those ages in mind. You can have confidence in them. Yeah.
So
Can I ask if all of these that are on this list, are they adaptable all the way through the grades that we're talking about, or are any of them that are limited only to a particular age or group?
There are some tools on this list that I would say are probably not appropriate for use because either they're more of a traditional screener. And so they're not actually looking at content. And so I would eliminate those. Some of those are like the ASQSE, potentially the DIAL, if that's on there, I don't remember. But the others, there are some, the STAR, which is at the top of my screen right here, of course, is developed for pre-K through 3rd grade, or the STAR early literacy is, but there's some others on here that while they might only be tools specifically for 4 or 5-year-olds, they would align nicely as an entry point into an existing K-12 similar tool that was designed for that older grade.
So is there any others than STAR early literacy? I'm starting to just like put together a safe harbor list here, and trying to figure out if we're going to get to the point where we're going to say for 4-year-olds, subsection A, 4-year-olds through the 3rd grade, subsection B. So full scope or by age, and where do you foresee us going on that? Are there some of these that are universal enough that we can just list them as safe harbors for entry all the way to the end of the assessment of the effects of intervention?
Yes, I would say that the STAR early literacy, the PELI, my IGDs, and sorry. I would say this.
My eyesight is not great.
I apologize. Yeah.
Are these acronyms, any of them? I'm just going to plug them in for now, but what's the second one?
Are we able to add any to that? Because like, I don't see dial 4 on there, and dial 4 is definitely, I mean.
You are able to add. Yes.
Why don't we
You
add
put dial 4 on your
add now
list.
and subtract later?
DIAL. I'm not letting my own get off there. I'm not on this committee just for altruistic purposes.
Add it in there, and then we're going to be working.
I'm on there for
The
that.
grid's not complete, obviously, and we're still getting.
No,
more
it's
input from the
not.
survey. So add in anything,
Yeah.
and then we'll, like Allison probably has a
Yeah.
goal. We'll probably be Allison. We'll go through and finish this grid, and then when we come back together next week, then we can like really work to highlight those safe harbor. Ones that we would recommend because they meet the criteria. And that might be one thing I'd recommend too, is that we take a moment to look at those top row criteria and see if there's anything that's either A, missing,
Mhm.
or B, we can take out, or that's as helpful for our decision making for the safe harbor. And then when we provide this list of criteria and safe harbors to the
Mhm.
board, then we can.
Yes. I just want to clarify that this is obviously not a comprehensive list of everything that's out there and it exists. More so, it's an incomplete list. But what I wanted to offer was a framework of evaluating what gets put on that list and then fine tuning what are those maybe top 5 things, whatever that might be. I see
So-
someone's hand.
so
is up.
Allison,
Or
did
sorry,
you
go
have-
ahead.
Allison, did you have some more then that were universal that could be used for safe harbor? You mentioned the STAR early and the MyGG, whatever that is.
So yeah, the My IGDs would be one, which is the individual growth and development indicators, as well as the PELI, which is the preschool early literacy indicators. And that's a tool that's developed by the same folks as DIBELS, which is now under the umbrella of a Cadence Reading. And that's a common one that you would see in school districts as well too.
So the top 5.
Does it have to be the top 5? I mean, wouldn't it be, if it meets the criteria, it's on there?
As
Right.
many
Yeah.
as there are.
As many as we can find that meet the criteria, and then any you can find that we didn't put on there that meet the criteria. I don't think we need to limit a number.
You could put in this rule. You could, if the board chose to delegate, you could put in this rule, whatever list you come up with, and then you could provide sort of a self-executing annual review for determination as to whether there are any new methodologies that can be moved to the list. And I think there's some precedents. You have a place in there a couple of times where the superintendent is given the discretion to add. It's in the context of career and technical education fields, the specific fields for class 4C. Yeah. That anything that comes on the radar, and you could use that same sort of terminology here if you chose, and delegate to the superintendent and you could put sideboards on it, shall consult with the members of a literacy working group in identifying on at least an annual basis any new and emerging methodologies that are established sufficiently to be added to the list into the safe harbor. I hope you have like 20 in subsection 2 or 3 or wherever it is, that you have a list of the gold standards for determining literacy. And you still say, let these guys mix and match. And a local district might say, we have a dibble of this and a dibble of that. and put whatever together that they're doing right now, because I think that what's most relevant is always going to be the teacher who's passionate about ensuring the learning of the kids that they're working with, and that trusting them to mix and match and add to, and is an important consideration, giving them the guidelines in subsection 1 to do so.
And Lindsay, I like the language that you actually shared earlier about the evaluation tool. I think something like that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, this still allows us being the Board of Public Ed to go back and evaluate these things. And if a school district wants to make the case that there's an assessment that they know is research-based and developmentally appropriate that should be on the list, I don't see any problem with doing that.
But the more inclusive the list is to begin with, the
Right.
less work and stress on the
Absolutely.
district.
But we
right?
don't want to limit it just to the list.
Yeah,
So
But if we can get the
yeah.
20 or so, I think we should put as many on there that we are knowledgeable, meet the legal criteria.
I've
Yeah.
got right now a subsection 1 that would say the local board of trustees shall adopt and ensure use of an evaluation methodology to identify, enroll, and admit children to early literacy targeted interventions. I'm not saying pupils because the 4-year-olds aren't pupils yet, so I'm using the term children. Okay, we can decide whether that's the right vernacular at some point down the road, but
Next
that's in
Friday.
there as a placeholder. The evaluation methodology must be research-based, ... Okay, guys, what are the broad categories? And subsection 2 says, a school board adopting and using one of the evaluation methodologies set forth in this subsection shall be construed to have complied with this rule. Use of one of the listed evaluation methodologies shall not, however, be required, provided that the district's adopted evaluation methodology conforms to the requirements of subsection 1 of this rule. And then you just have the laundry list.
Just reminded me we have to do rulemaking. Yes.
But if you kept it that simple, it'll be understandable. It will be global in effect. and will allow local control and local expertise to cover under subsection 1, whatever they feel is appropriate and necessary that meets the requirements of the rule, and to have these safe harbors. So if somebody's going, I want to point and click. I'm not sure. I'm just getting into this right now. I'm one of those 75 school districts with 25 or fewer kids and, only a handful of teachers. They're all my members, by the way, every one of them. And no administrator in sight. So there's a difference between what Pioneer Elementary is going to do versus what Lockwood's going to do, so I think this would work. And if you guys, I don't know what's on this list. And I think we can come up with the broad categories of the characteristics of success and legitimacy that you can populate with your expertise in subsection 1. And you guys can also collectively identify and crowdsource and identify the laundry list in subsection 2.
Marie, you
Also-
want to jump in?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say on row 25 that I added a link there. That is from the national, hold on. Too many tabs open. Oh, the National Center on Intensive Intervention, and it's a link full of different ones that show the level of evidence behind them also. So I didn't want to go and start plugging those ones in, but that one has a pretty, and it's at the K5. So it's definitely, I looked for pre-K, it does not have that, but
That's a
there's some
great
extra evidence
resource.
for us.
That raises a new question. Are there any organizations that are of sufficient reputation to adopt any that they adopt by reference? It's like adopting the building codes by reference. You don't go in and say a building has to be built on 24-inch centers, no more than that, and at least this much structural support with an engineer's approval. You reference the Uniform Building Code. Is there any organizations or combination of organizations, ASCD, for example, I don't know. Is there anybody out there that does this sort of vetting that we can adopt by reference and periodically decide whether or not they deserve to remain on the list?
Allison, is that where like near would come into play or only through the Office of Head Start? And
Yes, I mean, I think I'm just going to say this because I think that it's going to speak to a variety of comments and topics that are coming up. I think that what's tricky about this conversation is that there's a lot of really fantastic tools out there that can be used, but not all of them are designed with 4-year-olds in mind. There's a lot of K-12 stuff, but there's less 4-year-old stuff. So when you're thinking about having a list of 20 tools, that might totally be possible for K-1, 2, but it's less likely that that's going to end up being the case for 4-year-olds. And that's just because of this separation within that field. And that's also going to be the case for when you go to look for certain organizations that are going to make or vet those recommendations. You're going to have them for 0 to 5, you're going to have them for K-12, but you're going to find only very few that really span that bridge of P3.
So do we have someone on this council who has that really tight? I'm thinking of our professor from MSU. I don't even know you. She's like, I'm never going to meet that girl now.
It's
someone
Christine
have that-
Lux, and she's here. She and I
That's
share
right.
that.
I'm just thinking she
specific
sounds pretty
expertise,
skilled to
both of
me
us.
in that area.
Mhm.
That would be willing to take the list that comes off the survey and go through and vet them. I mean, 15 of us doing this in this room would be ridiculous use of
Yeah.
time.
And that's exactly.
But I just think if we find someone
so
who
that's
we've got
exactly,
to vet them.
Yeah, so the survey is actually Christine has sent that
Oh,
out. And then
fantastic.
Allison, who.
I'm really
yeah,
nice, Christine.
Yeah, and then
overall.
Allison, who's speaking, is the one who's going through and like really adding in the additional.
But are they
information.
vetting them before they put them on there?
Yeah.
So they
Well,
don't make
yes.
this
This
list?
is the full list,
Well-
and then the next step after we have this conversation is to
Mhm.
then go through the vetting process of exactly what you're saying. So then
Mhm.
next week or after we have all this information back from the survey, then we'll have the opportunity to go through the ones that have been vetted based
Mhm.
off the categories that we want to make sure are in here. So that's going to be, is it appropriate for 4-year-olds?
Right.
Is it cost effective? Is it developmentally appropriate? Like, and anything else that we want to make sure are those categories. So once we or you all as a group decide what those categories are, then we can add those in. So then they can go back to Christine and Allison.
And
they
then
can
we'll
go
have
through
one or
that.
two people highly skilled
Yeah,
checking each of them out to let us know, are they even an option,
correct.
right?
Does that sound good, Allison and Christine?
Yes.
Ladies,
Yeah,
Yes.
all I want on this, when you guys are all done doing this, and helping me better understand as a member of this group. And so then I can help my members too. I just want to make sure that you guys can say candidly, this is the consensus list. This is what people who know are going to say belongs on this list. And then we can always back cleanup during the rulemaking process.
Yeah.
Someone will come out of the woodwork and say, hey, you forgot. And I'll, by the way, I'm asking only for a friend who is a legislator, not literally now, but what does Texas use? Because we almost got that in here. Just so you know, is there something that Texas uses in particular that's branded with a name on it? Do you get anybody know? They had, like, they were off to the races and this close to put it in the bill. So I think we probably are, but it might find its way onto the safe harbor list as a peace offering, along the way here.
Yeah.
Lance, that can take place during the rulemaking through public comment. There's a public comment period.
That's fine with me. I'm just saying, you guys, you're so close here right now, and I don't mean to rush you, but you guys have all the expertise at this table necessary to round out the broad categories of the characteristics that you want, which would fit every single one of them on page 2. And you got it in your matrix here, and I see that. And so the top row head or column headings might be your matrix almost. I mean, it probably doesn't, I can't see it well enough to tell you whether it's going to adapt or not, but it looks like that's what you're doing here is you're talking about the purpose and the category of and the span of age and all of that stuff. That's going to go in here and populate in subsection 1, and subsection 2 is going to be the list that matches those things that everybody agrees upon. And I'm actually happy to hear that there might only be 5 of them. Because if there's 20, they're probably too convoluted and confusing for a board to decide which one. You could have probably a year's worth of meetings on it, right?
Great. Okay. Well, I think we have some good direction. I think the only thing that I'm curious about is looking at those green ones. I know they're really small, but just making sure that as we're thinking about the categories, is there anything else that you all would want to see? Or are we missing anything? And part of this too is like, we want to make sure that we're first and foremost aligning to what's in the bill. And then if there's any other elements or categories that we want to make sure are incorporated or included in this, that we're doing it now.
I think we've got it, but one of the things that of course we all know, but not every school district has the resources, is that when we're looking at kids by definition that are falling below pre-literacy, when we're looking at 4-year-olds, we're looking at a lot of things that to outsiders don't necessarily look like literacy standards. And I think might be worth explaining some of that more holistic child-based stuff that we're looking at. Not necessarily saying that we need it here, but as we think about those criteria so that we don't get pushed back later of saying like, well, why are you thinking about self-regulation? Well, because you really can't get very far without it. So I don't know what y'all think, but I mean, I'm a little concerned hearing some of the testimony during the session on this, that some people may need, I don't know how to do it, but a little bit of education on what that really means at the age of 4.
That it doesn't work to just say, read. Right.
Or if you know the ABC song, you're good to go, right? I mean,
We're not going to count.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that doesn't count. But, understanding from you is really professionals who think about it all the time versus how it looks to the outside. I don't know if it's in our report or what, but I'd like to see some of that too, so they understand why we're doing it, especially with a school with not a single P3 teacher or a school district that hasn't had familiarity with doing this before. I mean, we want to enable them.
The evaluation methodology must be research-based, must cover topics that interfere in effective learning. That's what you're going to do in here, is the characteristics that you're going to talk about. Does a kid need to be able to sit still long enough and avoid slapping somebody next to them in order to learn to read well, and allow the person next to them to learn to read well? You can get into those things because they interfere and indicate a likelihood of failure to read on grade level by the end of grade 3. Right? I mean, that's the whole reason that you're concerned about it. It's not just because it's the kid's a pest, it's because it's going to interfere in effective learning.
I mean, would that be where within the category or we have within the report definitions around developmentally appropriate practices? I mean, it will
Yes.
obviously include literacy, but there is more to it than just
Include developmentally.
the AP.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that kind of from my perspective, I know you all think about it every day, is just to make sure we're kind of maximalists and explaining what this really looks like.
Yeah, that's a good point. Colette, we'll go to you in the room, and then Tammy, I see your hand up online, so we'll have you go after Colette. Thanks.
When you mentioned math, can we still do math? And then you're talking about social emotional piece. I think that's our responsibility to provide. I mean, we can note it in there, like say high quality, like a high quality classroom experience, whatever we're calling it, a classroom, but, and then the educators in that setting understand that means like all the domains of learning, but for purposes of this, it is the literacy piece. But that if we just keep referencing high quality, because our goal is to be like the top, like high quality. And part of that is literacy. Oh, but there's these 5 other things, but the legislators maybe weren't interested in hearing all of those things, or we would have had universal pre-K, right? So just making sure that maybe we use that language of universal, comprehensive, I mean, not universal, but high quality early learning, you know, just, and that would include that. And I think anybody at the table would understand that's what we mean, like all the domains.
I have a question. This is more devil's advocate than my own question. I asked several colleagues for input, coming here. And so I said, what would you want for a screener? Right. And someone gave me this feedback. The screener should be teacher created skills checklist and or a rubric. That there may be something out there already that includes orientation of a book, recognizing the difference between letters and numbers, sustained attention and or interest in reading, pre-reading skills like pointing to pictures, telling their own story, possibly recognizing sight words, making predictions, etc., possibly inclusive of basic retail skills as well. So I wondered, with that note, would a district be able to argue? So let's say we have this safe harbor list, right? Would a district be able to argue, and do we need to address that a teacher created checklist is acceptable if it's asking for stuff that's research based? Or do we need to clarify it does have to be a predetermined screener, not teacher developed? Does that make sense? Because a kid being able to identify sight words or pre-reading skills might be research based, right? Them doing that does help us tell about literacy. But do we need to clarify if we've got this safe harbor list, or you can do your own if it's research-based? Could a teacher checklist with research-based skills be research-based, or do we need to define it's got to be a produced vendor product? I just think that's something we would need to consider.
It
Yeah,
needs
go ahead,
to be-
Tammy.
it needs to be vetted. It needs to have gone through a process of determining reliability and validity for the purpose which is intended. So there's an entire process by which these other assessment tools have gone through a wide variety of research.
Mhm.
Hundreds of thousands of children have been screened
Mhm.
or gone through using them. And that allows for the stability of the tool in its recognition. But I need to say that when you're talking about those teacher checklists, what the teacher does, I have a series of tiny tools that I use that track these early literacy skills that I use on a formative level, because the darn big test gives me a number or a level, and that level doesn't tell me what the child needs, when I actually need to know which letter sounds the child does not know in order to teach them in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you,
That's-
Tammy.
that's
I
not
agree with
the
that. I just
idea.
wanted to make sure we're careful when we just say research-based. We've got to define, it can't just be a teacher list of them choosing research-based.
No.
And so I just think that could be a pitfall for us.
Can I cob together what I'm like making into Frankenstein? You guys can tell me how many times I jumbled words that don't belong.
Love that you're writing these rules for us right now, Lance. Go
Well,
ahead.
I participate in these things. I generally try to do that because you're going to have someone else do it that's got about my same skill set. So you
If
know,
you're talking about me, it's less.
must be research-based, include a process for assessing readiness and capacity for acceptance of developmentally appropriate practices, self-regulation, participation in a high-quality targeted learning environment, sustained attention based on the individual judgment of insert, those are kind of the things that are buzzwording at me. I know it's an incomplete sentence, but where am I going on this? And are we somewhat close to the sort of amalgamation of skills that we're seeking to assess, or capabilities and readiness for learning that need specific terms of art that you use in your practice that will be commonly understood by others in similar positions? It is jumbled, okay? The evaluation methodology, this is a subsection 1, not a safe harbor list. It must be research-based because that's what the law already says. And, you guys can further define what that means if you want, but you could also leave it alone and let it stand in of its own right, because your safe harbor is going to be an example of the types of things that really are research-based, and they got to find something comparable there too, okay? Be research-based, include a process for assessing readiness and capacity for acceptance of developmentally appropriate practices, include self-regulation, participation in a high-quality targeted learning environment. I just threw in sustained attention. And then this last piece that Lori was talking about, based on the individual judgment of someone qualified to administer this assessment. Maybe someone in the district, an individual responsible for making these determinations. What am I adding in that doesn't belong? What
about that piece? And I don't want to say it this way, so don't type this word.
Mhm.
But what about that piece that it's a vendor, right? It's not teacher created, right? Maybe teacher administered, right?
Yeah.
A quality person, but what Tammy was speaking to a minute ago, ensuring that research-based means it's valid, it's reliable, it's had a, what do you call it?
Yeah, like
A population of kids who took it. I'm not using the right words.
Norm referenced.
Norm reference, thank you. I think we need to clarify, because if I'm just reading that, I'm thinking I'm skilled to do that. I can go make my own doing all that.
Probably are by your education and experience.
Right. And so you don't want to meet somebody getting to, going and doing it on their own. If we're saying, in order to guarantee that it's got a norm reference, it's valid, it's reliable, it can't be the teacher's own chosen checklist. It's got to be.
Well, research-based and norm reference.
Yeah,
What's-
maybe
what's
norm
the
reference
terminology?
covers it.
I know in the medical field, believe it or not, just because of some history that I have that some of you are aware of, I know how to look for garbage and versus good stuff, peer reviewed, publication in a particular set of journals. How rigorous are we going to be here on research based?
Is norm referenced enough? I mean, because an individual teacher checklist isn't going to be norm referenced, right? Is that enough? I mean, I don't want to lock people in too deep.
Tammy has her hand up, so she
Mhm.
might be able to add to this. Thanks, Tammy.
I've got a couple of things. One thing is beware of what's published. I mean, you cannot simply go based on publisher thus and such, created thus and such for thus and such, to go with their program thus and such, and have that actually be a tool that's going to meet the criteria that you would hope for evidence, for science driven. And I don't want to use the buzzwords of evidence-based, because that's actually used as a screen as well. Another thing that I am concerned about, because of this kind of laundry list of literacy things that come into K3, that the preschool, that the 4-year-old is not left out of that. And I would suggest that it would be useful for us to look at a heuristic like the active view of reading right now, in part because it includes self-regulation and motivation. There's 18 factors in it that I think could be really useful just for us to have in the back of our mind, so that we're not so locked in to only the alphabetic principle as being the sole thing, which basically means you're screening a 4-year-old for whether they've ever been taught to read before, which they haven't, because they're 4, right? So I don't know. It's a slippery slope. It's not just the fact that something's published, it's the fact that it's actually been studied rigorously.
Okay, by whom? Just so that we can get into, if we're going to set a standard.
It's gotta be peer reviewed.
Good, thank you.
So it absolutely has to be peer reviewed. It absolutely has to have norm referencing. It needs to have been, I would suggest, if we're going to use it for these purposes, it needs to have been in use for a long enough period of time for there to be a significant population of children that have been assessed utilizing that tool.
How many students have to have participated, if there is any number to pick? Or over what period of time? Successfully in use, proven practice, you know.
It's driven based on the population that it was intended for, and it's a percentage, right?
Yeah, so it's starting to get into like administrative manuals and looking at like reliability and validity, like p-values and statistics sort of stuff. And I worry that might get a little bit in the weeds with including all of that in there. But what I would say, I would encourage folks to do is I would hope that maybe the columns that exist, or with an addition of a column on the spreadsheet, would help to clarify what I would say that all the tools that are on here would fall into that category as they are currently. Not all of them are early literacy specific tools though, but I think,
What I don't see across the top heading here is at least some of what we're talking about here. I mean, I could take those column headings and just copy and paste, but I don't think they're going to satisfy everybody collectively here in the room with the expertise necessary to make these determinations. And on the other end of the spectrum, I will tell you right now that if you use research-based and you don't go any further, from a legal standpoint, I can define and defend that in any number of different ways. And yeah, it'll provoke disputes is what it'll do. So enough sideboards.
So I think it sounds like defining what research-based means, and in the early childhood assessment field, there is a criteria for valid and reliable screening tools. And so we could just pull what that language is. I don't have it off the top of my head, and I don't want to say something out loud and be completely wrong with what that is, but it's generally like a 0.8 sort of reliability, validity. I renormed the ASQ with my advisor back in grad school. So I remember doing all of this. Yeah, that could just be pulled from the field as what is established criteria for that.
Is it ASCD that does that, or who publishes that?
It's going to be probably for a 0 to 5 tool. It's going to be somewhere else, but we could find that.
While we're looking, I do have a question, just kind of based on what I'm hearing about the potential differences around what these screeners and potential criteria might look like for 4-year-olds versus K3. Would it make sense to actually separate the two and have one specific criteria and list of screeners, the safe harbors for 4-year-olds, and then a separate one for K3, just so that we don't, I hear some people saying, we want to make sure that we're not just like putting a whole list in there where some of them might just be K3 and some might be appropriate for PK3 or P3. So maybe like separating those might be more straightforward to your folks and folks in the field, boards of trustees who are looking at this and trying to figure out what that looks like. And then I don't think then we get into doing one for like 4-year-olds for, kindergarten, first grade. It's just 4-year-olds K3 in recognizing that those are different.
Yeah, I would agree, McCall. I think if I was an evaluator and I was stepping in, I'm trying to put myself in those shoes, and I'm trying to see if this classroom-based program is meeting credentials here. I'm thinking like in terms of objectives, right? Like in pre-K and then K3 are cleaner if you keep those two separate. But within those, I think if we could, Lance, within your rules, capture like those 5 major areas of the science of reading, and I think everything will be hit, what you already have, but adding in phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary fluency, and comprehension. And then at those levels, we can edit within this sheet, like, okay, you have this assessment, it addresses these 3 or 4 or 5, or maybe addresses all the domains, and great, you're good for PK. and then you're great for K3 because you're using 2 assessments. Like, I think capturing those 5 domains for the science of reading, in addition to what we already have, and then within this spreadsheet, in that first red column, outlining those 5 areas will be really important, because as in Livingston, we have multiple assessments that we're using to address these different things. There's not a one size fits all, at least in our eyes. So we have different vetted assessments. So it's going to be like 4 different assessments in PK and then like 2 in K3. So I think that might be helpful.
Okay. Phonic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, right?
Correct.
And active self-regulation.
Yeah.
I've got
Active
active self-regulation.
And so I just want to pause there really fast. Before we move to anything else. So generally it seemed like we had like a lot of nodding heads about kind of separating the screeners for 4-year-olds and K3. And the criteria, right? I'm just gonna loop those together for now. Before we move forward, I just want to hear or see from the group, or generally get like thumbs up. We all agree that that's a good way to kind of proceed at this point. Good. Okay. Anyone online have any concerns with that? Okay. I didn't want to just like make that decision myself. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear me, but I
can.
just want to make sure that we are looking at these names of these assessments and also pulling in that survey data from Head Start, childcare, and programs that already have partnerships with public schools to make sure we're not overlooking anything, and that we are, again, using what Allison has so nicely set out about content focus, thinking what kind of tool it is and so forth. I just want to make sure we were doing that. I think that we may need to decide on a set of recommendations for 4s, because that might be more developmentally appropriate than for K3, which is much more established in the research literature anyway. So just to kind of throw that out there.
No, I think you're absolutely right there. And I think one thing that we can do after we leave today is kind of build up this document. This is just the start, right? Like there's still research data. The survey is still open until next Friday. So we want to make sure that we're honoring the survey results too, because that's really going to come from what schools are already using. So we want to make sure that we're inclusive of that data. So I think what we can do is we can pull that and put it in this list. You'll see that this list is going to include everything that we receive. It's not just going to be, for the time being, those research-based, all the criteria that we've talked about. So just keeping that in mind too, we're going to have to weed this out a little bit. And I think that's actually going to, I think, be a good practice for us, because then I think it'll lead to some of that consensus around what these, we're calling them safe harbors now, what all these safe harbors are for our schools. And it'll make us go through each of them in a really thoughtful way, instead of just putting a bunch on a list and kind of going from there. So we'll plan to do that when we meet next time. I'm hoping that we have the rest of the infrastructure kind of in place, and that we can finish going through this list and putting all of those on the safe harbor list. Just because you don't make the safe harbor list again, doesn't mean that you can't use that. It just means that you may have to prove that it's research-based.
But if it's submitted to us
Yes.
and it meets whatever criteria we determine, it should go on the safe harbor list. I mean, you just said just because it's not on the safe harbor list, if you send us something and we don't
Right.
put it on that list, you shouldn't be able to use it.
Right.
Because we've said it's not research-based. Right?
Well,
I mean,
Right. But we're not also
We
going
might
to
have said
have
we're
a,
not sure.
yeah.
okay. We're just not willing to, we're not willing to
But be ready to
guarantee it.
prove.
Okay, you can use it, be ready to prove it.
Yes.
I can do again, attorney stuff here. I can do a 501H election on my 990 for MTSBA as a C3. I can either say I commit myself to showing you by dollars and cents how much I spend on lobbying, or I can put myself to the test. And then when you come calling, I'll prove by facts and circumstances that I'm not engaging in more than an insubstantial portion of my activities to lobby. Yeah, that's subsection 1 versus subsection 2. 501H is a safe harbor election. I know that I can't spend more than $400,000 a year. Okay, versus facts and circumstances. Prove it. If and when the regulator comes calling.
So I just have a question that I think probably Lance can answer. okay, research is going to continue. We're going to make rules, and we all know nobody wants to open a rule more often than we have to once it's written. So is there a procedure that we can permanently add to the safe harbor list? Or, like cities use in planning, they'll do a design manual for stuff that changes more often than zoning as a whole, or use a universal building code. Is there some way to do that? Because we know in another 5 or 10 years, there are going to be tools, hopefully more good tools for 4-year-olds than we have right now. So is there a procedure that we can recommend that wouldn't make us open the whole rule up again?
Your rule on class 4C, I think it is, your non-degreed vocational ed teachers certified or endorsed in industries that are listed. And then it says, or any other emerging field that is identified by the superintendent. So you could say, with consultation with this group, you just have another subsection here that says items may be added to the list through an adjunct publication that must include consultation with this group or a like kind of group, and that the superintendent can add to the list as new tools become available and are proven to be statistically reliable and valid and accurate. You got precedents for doing that very thing with and the reason why is that, for example, even one that's not on the list still now, there are people that are making 6-figure salaries because they know how to phrase the right question to ChatGPT. You know that, right? Like that wasn't a field 5 years ago. And so, it's an example of, you don't want to have to come back in here and go through the whole rigmarole of rulemaking that costs $1,200 a pop, no matter how infinitesimal, versus creating a scenario for how you could add to this list and adequately publish it and ensure that it remains transparent to the public and that there's an opportunity for feedback.
I think we can consider that. I think generally on a rule of thumb, rules should be reviewed in a way that there's continuous reflection. So I would say if you do open it in 10 years, that's not a bad thing. I would anticipate with these types of rules, we would open them up sooner. And that's maybe to your question of why. Yeah. Content standards are usually on a 5-year basis. So it just kind of depends. Although some of them it's been a little bit longer, but it just kind of depends. But there is, like Lance said, there is precedence for this. Look at the, what's it called? Accreditation Reference Criteria Guide or something like that.
Mm.
That's just a reference to a document that has to be made publicly available. It's not in our rules, but there's reference to it in our rules. So you can do things like that. It just depends on how specific you want to get and how you want to create then the revision of that document. So
And the avoidance of finding it on the shelf with some dust on it
totally.
that nobody's looked at it for 10
Yeah.
years.
Totally. So it just kind of depends on how we want to approach that through this. Anyone have any other questions right now? Seems maybe like a natural place to have Allison maybe wrap us up with some of her thoughts. Or anyone else in the room who might have other questions. All right, Allison, what else do you want to share with us? Anything else?
No, that's really it. And I really appreciate the thoughtful conversation around all of these concepts. And again, my whole purpose of joining y'all today was to just put out a framework to really try and provide some clarity with how you have conversations about different tools. And that spreadsheet is certainly editable and is not complete. And I knew that coming in, and I felt good about that because of the expertise that's in this room. So I appreciate everything that y'all have added today and the work that you've done. And I'm happy to be a continued resource as it's helpful. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. And thanks for being a good thought partner in this too. There's lots of these things that we're just really grateful for you building this out and continuing to help us build this out. Really appreciate it. Anyone have any other questions just generally about this process, the conversation we've had in the last hour and a half?
We're still on for next Friday at 10.
Yeah, we'll get there in just a
All
second. hold tight. All right, I don't see any other questions, but before we like leave this part, do you care if I just kind of wrap?
Go for it. Yeah.
I think probably the best thing for us to do is we're going to continue to work on this. We'll continue to add information as we get more survey results. Again, it's going to be comprehensive, not necessarily what the end result will be. We'll also bring you some language that sounds like Lance has already started, and maybe some definitions of things that we've talked about here. What else do we have for next week?
Yeah, I think definitions and maybe the start of a guidance document. So then we can decide what would go into what Lance is starting and then what will just be general guidance that can help support this.
You can also throw my stuff away. I don't have any problem if you do. It's just.
It's a
you know.
great start. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful for us to be able to see it. So regardless, I mean, I anticipate there'll be some changes once this group all gets their eyes and hands on it to make some changes, which is a good thing. I think we want, you know, as much input as we can. And then next week, yeah, so next Friday we'll be here, same time, same place. We also still have the October 24th date set. Do you guys feel comfortable kind of holding that and seeing where we're at on next Friday, see how much we get through, see maybe what we still have left, and we may use it, we may not. But I anticipate if we do use it, we'll be here again. And we'll try to meet at the same time or however long we need to get done. Okay, I feel good about that then. We will come with some evaluation methodology language, like I mentioned. We're also going to jump into that We're also going to discuss the Jumpstart program and specifically what that framework needs to look like. So we'll bring some ideas that we have just based on conversations that we've had with folks. We'll make sure that we send you exactly what's required of that based on the legislation, and then we'll hopefully make some decisions around that. What do you guys feel like you need from us, other than what we've kind of signaled that we'd give to you? Anyone online have thoughts of things that you might need from us before next Friday? All right. Can we do a quick show of hands of who thinks they're going to be here in person again next Friday, if they know? Same.
Couple books.
Love that.
Special ed advisory on Friday.
Ooh.
So I might tap out on that one because that one's on. But I have to check to see if it's okay.
No worries.
Hold on.
Oh, that's good. Well, we'll still send like a RSVP when we send our kind of follow-up notes, just so we can get some information from you guys and make sure that we're prepared. I'll have table tents, I promise. By that time, you'll all know each other, so it won't be as big of a deal, but okay. Go ahead. Do you want to do something else?
Yeah, I think just in closing, if there's anything else that is going to be helpful in addition to what we already discussed, but like just kind of thinking back about how today went, and if you need some more clarification or if you're worried that we might not get to all the things that we want to get to, but it'd just be helpful to hear from you all if there's anything else that we can provide or prepare that will support the next steps of this conversation. I know it's a lot, and we were just appreciate the conversation so much. Yeah.
So let's go way back to the beginning when we first started talking about who could qualify in the three different options of the full day program or classroom-based program, home, or the Jumpstart Summer. So is it possible for Johnny to qualify for the classroom-based program and then have home-based opportunities with a device and then come to summer and then go to kindergarten?
Yeah.
So he
That's
can
the
participate in
intent.
all three of those.
1.25 A and B plus $1,000 is your formula for every qualifying
Yep.
kid, as long as they stay qualified from 4 years of age until the summer preceding the third grade.
Mhm. So the home-based piece doesn't mean they're not sitting in your classroom,
It
that
could
they
mean,
opted
yeah.
for a home-based learning instead.
Yeah, and Representative Barker has been really clear, and there's strong legislative history during his presentation of the bill where he literally says, I want to make it clear, that a student can qualify for every one of these together. Or one, these are not mutually exclusive. Pretty awesome. When I look at it, I mean, 125% weighted A and B. Grades
So it's
K
like a
through 3.
trifecta for this family of like,
You gotta get it going and show its success. And then people will really get enthused about it.
Do
And
we
we'll
have
get
any
the money
sense
in
at this point how many school districts are looking at these different options, or how this is being set up?
How many use exception for?
Yeah.
You got 1,200 kids. We grew from 44, 240, 210, 300, 400, and then about 2 years ago, boom, up to 1,000. And so we've got roughly 10% of the student population being served, when at least hypothetically, maybe 55% of the student population is eligible. And the eligibility, forget about going one direction. In other words, you can't masquerade exceptional circumstances as a targeted intervention program. But every targeted intervention qualified student would have qualified under exceptional circumstances. And so you really do have a pretty good crosswalk there. And there have been people, the only thing that's held people back has been the controversy associated with the ambiguity around the law. I didn't make that law, and I don't have to apologize for it. Whoever wrote it in 1978 can do so. But I am absolutely going to help my members use a law when it's on the books anytime I can. And so when we first started pushing the envelope on this was when we got full-time kindergarten under our belts. And then people started to conceive of early childhood education as something more and better than that. And so we went and looked, and it's like, this thing's been hanging around here forever. It says that you can wave the wand if there are exceptional circumstances, and we've been pushing it, right? And no apologies made. I think Representative Beatty knows that. When he put out PD 9 to terminate it, he knew that we were pushing it, but we were pushing it validly. And he acknowledged that we were pushing it the right way. But when you have Representative Rosendale, when he was in the state legislature, saying, I demand to know who's been getting this, like I'm going to come running for you. And you have another legislator, I won't mention who, on a floor amendment trying to marry the extension of IDEA to age 21 with the cessation of exceptional circumstance enrollment, with nobody really understanding that was what he was doing on the floor. You can understand why people get a little head shy. Isn't being head shy kind of like a safety valve for teachers anymore and or school boards, right? So now that the intimidation factor is gone and the ambiguity is resolved and we know tangibly what we're getting, I think this thing's going to take off. Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we had 6,000 kids getting served in a couple of years. I hope.
Sounds exciting.
who would say the people?
Yeah.
51. If you do, I don't mind doing it. I transparently, I gotta be, I mean, if you think about it, if NAEP, here's my conditions, just in case somebody's recording there, which I know that they are, so that's fine. The conditions here are NAEP, it came out this last year and showed that we have 55% of third graders not reading proficiently. Okay, and if there's 55 times 11,000, let's go lowball. Okay, 5,500 kids qualify if their parents want you to, and if you can confirm that failure to meet a standard and reverse extrapolate the path back to the age of 4. I would assume that at age 4, you have more kids that are on a target not to learn effectively, and that teachers, lo and behold, probably do something good for them between the ages of 5 and 8 to make that happen. That's what I think is going on, is that your group of 4-year-olds who are not ready is a much larger group than the kids in 3rd grade who remain unready in spite of your valiant efforts. So I think 5,500 is number one low ball. And you're talking about full-time K-12 base aid A and B, assuming that parents want you to do it. And anybody that assumes 90% of the parents are going to say, I hate the public schools and I want nothing to do with them, the reverse is the truth. No matter what year you're talking about, since I was a kid and beyond, 90% of the people in Montana come to our public schools and rely on them to provide their kids education. And so you just do your math there. And unless we want to go, oh, we'll pretend it doesn't exist and shy away from it. We can't do that. It's not the way you're built. You know, I know that enough. And so when the dust settles here, get ready, $5,500 times the state share, not your max budget portion, not your $6,600, but 70% thereof. That's what the state share is right now on a statewide basis. So if you're kicking out 70% of 7,000, $4,900 a kid, round it up to 5. What's 5 times 5? $25 million. There's your 4-year-olds. Okay. And then you talk about the kids that are in grades preceding kindergarten, 1, 2. So that's 3 grades worth of kids, the same population of 5,000 apiece. So you got 15,000 kids, but now you're multiplying it times 25% of A and B because they're already getting the 100% of A and B. And you got that summer program. That's another pile of money. Okay. I'm coming up with $50 million when it gets going, but it is what it is. If you can wave the wand and knock 60 million out of it from underneath us with a couple of votes at the county commissioners level, the reverse can also be true. You know, we should not be shying away from the necessity of helping kids learn effectively so we can serve the goal of the people under Article 10, Section 1.
Way to bring it back to the Constitution.
I love that. I love the fact that people did that in 1972. You know that they couldn't even do copies at that time. There was no such thing as a fax machine. There was a copy. I think they had to crank it out like a butter churner or something. But so this was not about digital education. This was about according the individual dignity to each child. And I know that's why you guys picked your profession. I know it. And so, you know, what a great thing to be able to rely upon that and to stamp it out. It doesn't say it's our goal. It says it's the people's goal. And they validated it at the election and they protected it against incremental change by the supermajority required to change it.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. But before we end, we do have public comment on our agenda. There's no one in the audience. There's no one on Zoom. So I'm just going to take that to mean that there's no public comment today. Before we go, please fill out your forms that I handed out to you and get those back to us. Just want to say thank you guys again so much. For those of you on Zoom who took time, and I know just like, you know, had to sit around and listen to us most of the day. Just really appreciate it. Those of you in the room who took time to travel here and sit with us, again, really appreciate it. I like to remind people that this legislation came to the smallest state agency in state government. And it's one of those things that, you know, I don't know what they thought my background was, but it is not early literacy. So I just really appreciate all of you, the experts in the room, for coming and helping us and kind of leaning in to support our work. I think it's going to be really exciting and I can't wait to present what you guys come up with to the Board of Public Ed. I know that they're going to be in awe of all of the work you've done. So thank you again, and we'll see you next Friday, same time, same place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.